Christianity. Long associated with the Southern Bible Belt, fundamentalism is now nationwide and is attracting not only its familiar lower middle class, but also the young and the rich. But the success of these churches in reaching out, raising money, and pulling in converts has produced tension and turmoil within the fundamentalist movement. The most prominent example involves a young heiress from Minnesota and the $7 million she gave but now wants back from the church called The Bible Speaks. It was in the spring of 1981 when Elizabeth Dayton Dovie Dennis and her husband Jonas moved from Chicago to western Massachusetts and bought this $700,000 stucco mansion near the town of Lennox in the Berkshires. The money came not from the husband Jonas, born in Lithuania and a freelance photographer, but from his wife Elizabeth, or Betsy, whose $19 million fortune comes from the Dayton Hudson Corporation, the nation's fifth largest retailer, and its second largest bookseller, B. Dalton. During that first year, the Dovie Dennises began putting their roots down, learning the ways of Lennox, looking for a church to join. Betsy, who is 33 and from a Presbyterian family in Minneapolis, said she found the traditional Protestant churches in town boring. But there was one church she found not boring. It was called The Bible Speaks, and it is described by its charismatic pastor, Carl Stevens, as a Christ-centered, Bible-believing, fundamentalist church. Betsy would also find it to be all-consuming.
Anyone in the entire world, no matter where they come from, no matter if they don't go to church or they do go to church or whatever denomination they're a part of, once they believe in Jesus Christ, they're already saved.
The Bible Speaks says it has affiliated ministries in 19 states and 31 foreign countries. On 88 rolling acres, it operates the Stevens School of the Bible with 390 full-time adult students and a Christian day school with 300 students.
Live from the international headquarters of the Bible Speaks in Lennox, Massachusetts.
The Bible Speaks name is known because each day Pastor Stevens broadcasts a nationwide religious call-in show, Telephone Time.
In Jesus' name, amen.
We do have lines available if you'd like to join us on the air live with a Bible question or comment.
So, Betsy Dovie Dennis seemed impressed by Pastor Stevens and his exciting church. She threw herself into its activities, attending church services 3 times a week, daily Bible school, and Pastor Stevens' regular rap sessions. Betsy made friends in the church, and one of her closest was Kathleen Hill, who worked for Pastor Stevens in the church business office.
So this was more than just a passing friendship.
It was a very deep, intimate, it grew to be a very intimate friendship.
Yeah.
Very, you know, really close. She was like my best friend. I considered her my best friend.
In small amounts at first, Betsy began giving money to the church, $1,000 to start, then $10,000. And late in 1984, she and her husband agreed to give the Bible Speaks $1 million in Dayton Hudson common stock. The next spring, Betsy gave the church another gift, this one for $5 million. I have heard directly from God, she wrote Pastor Stevens. I am excited that this money will be used for God's kingdom. That gift, plus another $500,000 last December, was used to pay off the church mortgage, used for general improvements, for paving, for campus security, for an indoor swimming pool, and for converting an indoor skating rink into a 1,500-seat chapel. Jonas, the husband, later said he hadn't known about the $5 million gift, and in a letter to Pastor Stevens asked that he give Betsy no more financial advice, even if she asks for it. Jonas appealed for help to Wallace Dayton, his father-in-law, and on January 15th of this year, Jonas and Betsy left Lennox for the Dayton home in Minneapolis. The Dayton family then hired David Clark as an exit counselor in an attempt to neutralize what the family thought was the church's influence over Betsy.
What condition was Mrs. Dovie Dennis in when you first saw her and talked to her?
Well, I would have to agree. I felt undue influence was a factor.
How did that undue influence make itself apparent in Mrs. Dovey Dennis?
Well, sometimes what you encounter are trance states, kind of a dazed look that a person might exhibit.
You found her to be occasionally in a trance?
I would say so, yeah.
After her week-long session with David Clark, Betsy returned to Lenox in April, and in June she brought suit in the Berkshire Superior Court in Pittsfield for recovery of her $7 million, charging the church, Pastor Stevens, and Kathleen Hill with fraud and undue influence, and claiming an intense emotional dependence on Pastor Stevens and a diminished mental capacity. Because Betsy, her husband, and her lawyers have declined to be photographed or recorded for this report, many of the Dovey Dennis pictures are from the church archives. To defend itself, the Bible Speaks hired a well-known New York attorney, Roy Grutman. Grutman says it was Betsy's husband, not Betsy's pastor, who used the influence.
What about her husband? What do you know about her husband?
I know that based on the objective facts, he has no other visible means of support other than what he derives from his wife's very substantial fortune. And I also think that the facts demonstrate that her husband, along with her father, and perhaps at the instigation of her husband, is the precipitating cause of putting his wife in the hands of brainwashers.
The lawyers that her father chose claim that it was the church who did the brainwashing.
Well, nobody dragooned her into the church. There was no entrance pusher that drove her into this church. She came voluntarily. There was no coercion. There was no overreaching. There is no evidence of any external pressure. Absolutely none. And there are documents signed by Mrs. Dovey Dennis in which she says that this is a voluntary, open, and willing gift without any pressure.
But at a federal court hearing in Worcester last month, Betsy Dovey Dennis testified she had no mind to make a gift with, and that her friend Kathy Hill had actually dictated the letter giving the church $5 million. Mrs. Hill says Betsy was lying.
Did you help her write the letter that transferred the money?
No, I did not. You know, I was there. You know, when two people are doing something and they're doing it together, you may incorporate a better way of saying it.
What do you mean when two people are working over the letter? There may be
as far as the way to put a phrase, maybe the correct English, but not dictating terms and specifics and the desire for her to give a gift. I never, ever asked her to do anything like that. She was a very determined young woman.
Ms. Hill, this is the complaint that the Dovey Dennis lawyers have brought, and in it they claim the following, that in 1984 and 1985, you counseled Betsy Dovey Dennis to separate herself from her husband. Right or wrong?
Absolutely a lie.
That you told her she should separate herself from her family.
That's not true.
That you should assume direction of her financial affairs.
Absolutely not. I didn't have any control over the woman. I mean, she just did what she wanted to do and then told me about it. But now, every decision that she has made, I have been accused of making it.
Pastor Stevens insists the lawsuit is a cycle of lies and that his fundraising efforts were no more than those of any other church pastor.
But at no time did you encourage her to give you money.
I have an established practice before God that I will never ask anybody for money or encourage it. As a matter of fact, if I hadn't been a pastor who cares for her family, we had to stop having her give money. She wanted to give more money.
So the letter that she wrote in her own hand in April 1985...
With her own mind.
With her own mind. Are her own words?
Certainly her own words. As far as I know, completely, thoroughly, her own words. I did give her a page of things that we could do. And I said, I know that you don't care what we do with the money, but you're giving the money, and I would like to have you circle what you would like to have the money go for.
The Dovey Dennis lawsuit aside, the church has not been without controversy and criticism. One group of ex-members, calling themselves 12 Incorporated, regularly pickets the Bible Speaks.
We want to see Jesus Christ glorified, not Carl Stevens.
Pat Manchester, one of the 12, testified in court on behalf of the Dovey Dennises that Pastor Stevens was a deceiver and not a truthful man.
They've ripped off families, they've taken their incomes, they have divided families, they have done everything that is against Christianity.
Other ex-members have complained that the church raised money by getting converts to sell their homes, give the proceeds to the church, and then move to Lenox with the promise of a rent-free campus apartment. Pastor Stevens says he personally never used that technique. But Alan and Dorothy Carlson, who were church members in Maine, say they remember Pastor Stevens' telephone calls.
He would get on the phone and just build us up. And the bottom line was, have you sold your house yet?
The Carlsons say they also remember that Pastor Stevens prayed they would find a buyer.
We were called up front, and they prayed over us that the Lord would give us the ability to sell the home. At that same service, a message was preached about selling all that you have and laying it at the apostles' feet. And, of course, he was considered to be the apostle.
The Carlsons, in fact, sold their house, gave the church $15,000, lived room and board free on campus, worked for the church magazine without pay for 2 years, and left the church in 1981 with about $300 to their name.
Did you find Pastor Stevens to be a moral man, Mrs. Carlson?
There's only one incident that I can relate to personally, and I emphasize that personally, because there's so many of my friends that have had experiences. And he forced me, in a sense, to kiss him. I was the last one to get out of the van. He caught my hand and pulled me back. And I thought, oh, I've offended him. I haven't said goodbye in the proper way or something, and I've dishonored my pastor. And this was the first thought that came to my mind. So I thought, oh, I'll hug him, just give him a little hug. And he took his hand and turned my face and kissed me on the mouth.
Pastor Stevens says that before God and the angels, such an incident with Mrs. Carlson or anyone else never happened.
Do you think Pastor Stevens engaged in brainwashing?
I don't know if brainwashing is the right term, but there were a lot of coercive techniques.
Robert Olivadotti, a former pastor, was Director of Public Relations and Development for the church from 1977 to 1980. He is now a businessman in Yarmouth, Maine.
Very difficult for you to stay there in that environment and not change the way you think.
Former members also say that Pastor Stevens manipulates his followers by claiming his words have been anointed by God, and by claiming, according to ex-member Elizabeth Anderson, that critics of the church will be punished with divine retribution.
I can remember the one clearly of the man who had cancer of the tongue. You know, the tongue is such an evil instrument, and if you wag your tongue against the ministry, you can expect these sort of things.
Why, Pastor Stevens, do so many ex-members of your church express fear about retribution?
That's the most obnoxious thing in the world. You talk about a few ex-members which are motivated by the witch hunters, by 10 or 11 people who have no integrity.
I've read that you regard yourself as anointed.
That's not true. No, that's what certain enemies and witch hunters would like to have the public believe, to discredit a very fruitful, practical ministry that's doing a good work for God.
You know, if you could get them in a room where nobody else was around and it wasn't going to be told to anybody else, that I think you'd find that he believes that he's anointed by God in a very special way.